I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
Many books, movies, plays, songs touch upon the universal theme of from rags to riches. It's even baked into our American culture from the days of our Declaration of Independence. However, do we take the time and learn from how we got from our lowest point to the heights of our success? Most organizations would have to answer that question no, due to their structure being around execution and not learning. My next guest has his own rags to riches journey, and he even wrote a book about it. And during our interview, he unpacked the steps from the days he was nearly homeless to running a successful business and enjoying a fulfilling life. A man who takes what he learns, applies it to his own life, and then teaches his insights to others, James Fair authentically and humbly walks his talk. He shared some of these principles. The things you want to avoid are the doors to confidence and possibility. The lowest point in a person's life is the universe saying, it's time to wake up. Opportunities are part good decisions, part luck, but should be considered. Change takes place first by a new attitude, perspective, or idea. Therefore, if leadership is your aim, become a student of leadership. James Fair has 35 years of experience in IT, 30 years in leadership, and a dozen years in the interpersonal workspace. James combines his love for IT and cybersecurity along with his passion for leadership and development. James Fair on the Business of Intuition. James, thanks for being on the show. It's great to have you. And I wanted to ask if you could start us off with tell us your story. I mean, how did you get from where you were to where you are? You got a book that sort of indicates that journey. And I think we're all interested in sort of that rags to riches story and what lessons can we learn from somebody else. And hopefully we don't have to repeat the same process.
Right. Yeah.
What happened and what did you learn?
It's a long story. I'll narrow it down for you and the audience.
No worries.
Really, I came from a place where I had low self-esteem. I didn't believe I was capable of doing much. I had computer skills at the time. I had tech skills. I had kind of dove into it on my own, but I had no piece of paper demonstrating that I had that skill, and no one would hire me based on the fact that I just said so. It's really what it came down to. So I ended up doing just terrible. I mean, not terrible. Everybody has a job to do, and more power for those who do it. But I ended up doing all the jobs that no one wanted to do. Like I remember, I think the epitome for me was I walked in on a construction site because I'm just like, I got to do something. I got to find a way to make money, some odd job, something. And the foreman said, all right, do you have any skills swinging a hammer? I go, no. How about laying concrete? No. He's like, okay, well, here's a shovel. And he hands me a shovel and he goes, see that pile of gravel over there? I need you to move it from that room over to that room. And this pile of gravel is like 30 feet tall. It is several tons of gravel. And I consider myself a fairly intellectual person, not necessarily physically, skilled. And it was I remember just kind of being overwhelmed. But the crux of it came when I went home that same day and I knew it was coming. I'd just been avoiding it. I opened the cupboard and the only thing I had left to eat for that rest of the day was a leftover jar of peanut butter. And that was me just kind of going, this cannot go on, right? I am this close to being homeless. That's next for me. I'm running out of money. I'm running out of food. What's next? And I broke down. I fell apart right then and there. I was a mess. But some part of me, some fire in me just came raising up from inside. And I just screamed out, this is not how I'm meant to go down. And from that point forward, I put my life in a whole different direction. I went back to school. I did a leadership stint. And I realized that leadership was my passion and what I want to do with my life. So I ended up taking over for a leader at an IT job. The former manager was everything you don't want to know about a leader, like all the things you shouldn't do as leadership. He was that guy. So I had to learn what not to do as a leader, right? I had a lot of skills in how not to lead people from this person. So, but leadership's always been a passion of mine. Even as a kid, I would read books, and what I would gather from them were the leadership skills, leadership tactics, the things that they use. Even nonfiction books I've read, it's always the leader and how they treated people I was interested in. So leadership was my out. Anyway, so that really, really bad leader, he decided he was going to demand a raise. It was around Christmas time, and he went to the COO and said, I demand a raise. And the powers that be said, no, that's okay. And he said, that's it. I'm going to go home for 2 weeks. When I come back, you're going to pay me my raise. And he left. And so my buddy and I, my coworker and I, we were left to run this whole, 150 person company for a while, technically. And so we did. We worked 6-7 days a week. We were working 10, 14-hour days. I was working so much, my wife time, thought I was having an affair. But we knocked out all the problems. And 2 weeks later, when that guy called back and said, okay, you already paid me what I'm worth now, they said, no, you can just stay gone. And it became he and I running the show. And I knew that was coming. So for about 6 months, I was all over everything. And sure enough, about 6 months into it, they came to me and said, okay, we want one of you to be the leader of the department. And we're going to offer it to you first. But if you say no, we're going to offer it to your partner, your coworker. I'm like, well, I guess I'll say yes then. So that was my first stint into management. And it was utterly terrifying. I was completely unprepared for it. But it's how I started. It was my path. I got to bring to the table all those things that I had learned and apply them. And no one directed me. I was given carte blanche to lead the department the way I wanted to. And I really created a people-focused environment. I believe if you take care of the people, everything else will follow.
God, I was writing some notes down as you were talking, James. So one thing you said was in the very early stages of this, you knew you were avoiding the inevitable, meaning I didn't want to pay attention to the fact that I didn't have much in my cupboard other than a piece of, a jar of peanut butter. I just bang some of these things out. Is one of the principles that you are helping others around is to face what's happening, be accountable to what is. Don't avoid those fears, lean into them. Is that one of your lessons learned?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I began to lean on all of my fears. So like public speaking was a thing that was like probably my number one fear, outside maybe heights was number two, but public speaking was number one. And yet I knew as a leader, I'm going to have to learn to speak in front of people. And so I began what I call kind of just chipping away at that, right? It's if we think of them like obstacles, like brick walls. Well, I began to erode that wall every chance I got. I would find an event to do public speaking. I remember my first event, that was the phone system it glitched out and all of the recordings would, push 1 for this, push 2 for that. Those were all gone. This was a film company, so it was done by a professional and I had nothing, and he was out of town. So I'm like, I'll just record myself really quick because I don't know what else to do. So I recorded my own voice doing it. And the next day I got a call from the CEO and he said, your voice is amazing. I want you to do those from now on. So all of a sudden I was doing voice recordings and other public speaking events like that. So I really believe in fears are not going away, right? If we continue to ignore them, they do not go anywhere. They do not dissipate on their own. If we really want to get somewhere, get past those fears, and often, at least in my personal experience, and I believe in others, fear is holding us back from something that we really want to do, right? Public speaking is a passion of mine that I found out, but I had to get there first. I had to get over it. And I think fear a lot of times are obstacles for us to get where we want to go. And the only
That's a really great point.
Those.
The person I talked to last week was talking about fear being a window into opportunity, something that you should not avoid. Not to say that we want to bathe ourselves in fear, but they provide us a direction for something that we're being drawn to learn or to experience versus avoiding them. You also mentioned that, my words, not yours, but it sounded like you kind of hit the lowest point at one point. Maybe you said you lost it, you broke down, you had a tough time there. Do you feel that the contrast of that extreme moment is necessary for all of us to experience? Meaning, do we have to go through hell in order to get to heaven? Do we have to be able to be with our last scoop of peanut butter before we realize something has to come clear that we're not going to let that happen? Because I have some of those same stories, right? I can count back to my first apartment that I rented after my first marriage was disbanded, and I hated it so much. It was part of my motivation to moving forward. And so I asked myself, do I need those negative experiences in order to create the clarity of what I want? What's your take on that?
I love the way you put that. And my take is, we hear a lot of people having dark night of the soul. It's a real thing. And now, does every single person have to go through that? Is there a shortcut? I guess if you're self-aware enough to be able to say, I got to make a change before change happens to me, then perhaps. But I think for most of us, yeah, it requires some massive catalyst for us to realize that the path we're on isn't the right one. Sometimes it's a death in the family, Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's that awareness, or maybe a critical illness. It could be running out of money. But unfortunately, I do see most of us aren't motivated on our own. We require some external stimulus to get our butts moving in a lot of cases. And this was certainly mine. And as you mentioned, right, you had your own. So yeah, I don't know that anyone that's been spared from those, not who really wants to propel themselves anyway.
Well, I believe, this is my point of view, that we can certainly leverage those down moments in our life to create the clarity and to inspire us to imagine what we want. And I also think that it's more powerful to be moving towards something versus moving away from something. Like, I hate this, so I got to get away from it. And in some ways, by focusing on the thing you're moving away from, you only bring it closer because you keep thinking about it. If we actually replace that with what is it that we're really desiring, what does that feel like to have the thing that we want, or that experience, then that's a completely different sort of structure around motivation. And I even remember, this was a study I read a while back, because we've done a lot of work in healthcare and so forth. And so I read some of their stuff. And there was some study maybe 15 years ago that was talking about people who had a high probability of dying, for lack of a better way of saying it, because of several factors. They were really obese. They weren't exercising. They were eating really poor food. And they were very stressed out. And there was probably a fifth one. And the study basically said, when confronted with those negative potential consequences, that if you don't do this, you might end up dying, right? That people's motivation to get into action was minimal. But when you started to ask people, what do you really want? I want to spend time with my grandkids. I can't wait for that next hug from my little cutie pie. I can't wait to go traveling and experience a wonderful Italian meal, in Venice. You start getting people thinking that way, their motivation to take action is actually quite a bit more so than being motivated by fear. So I think that the negative bottom points of our life can wake us up, but I don't necessarily, in my opinion, feel like we want to stay focused on moving away from something. We need to be imagining what we want and move towards something.
I like that a great deal. Yeah, I totally agree, Dean. Okay, that may be the wake up call to it's the catalyst to push us in another direction, but it's the thought of something better, I think, that often leads us in those directions. And that's exactly like 20 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was, when I split with my wife for 20 years, I left for work and I knew something was wrong in our relationship. I knew I was not happy, but I was too scared to do something about it. And then I happened to come across a radio station where they were interviewing people on their deathbed. And the study said, all right, if you could change one thing in your life, what would it have been? And like 85% of those people said, I married the wrong person.
Yes.
And I went, bam, that is me right now. Yeah. And I don't want to die a bitter, angry old man because I was too afraid to make a change. So I had both. I had this motivation to not be the bitter old guy I'd end up, but it was a future where I could be better, right? A future where I'm not the angry person, where I could have a better life, where I could be with someone I wanted to be. that really was a catalyst for me. Go ahead.
Tying into the title of this little show, The Business of Intuition,
Yeah.
did you intuitively know, was there some sort of hidden wisdom or voice that was trying to get you to pay attention early on, even maybe in some part of your marriage that you sort of knew, didn't want to know, but you knew that this was the wrong thing? Could you identify in arrears like, you know what, I knew a third year into it or fourth year into it, and yet I didn't pay attention to that?
Yeah, I suspect that probably goes on for most of us in many aspects of our life, but 100% for me. Yeah, there was a part where I look back and I go, because what the catalyst for me was someone telling me I was angry. We were playing tennis and they're like, "Oh, you're an angry person." And I'm like, "Wait, I've been called a lot of things in my life, but angry is not one of them. It's never been attributed to me." So that was the excuse for me to go back and look and see at all the places in my life where I was just getting angrier and angrier and angrier. But I knew it all along. Let's not pretend I didn't,
Yeah.
I think most of us, even in like, I don't want to jump necessarily to another track here, but even in like cybersecurity events or something like that, people will say, "Oh, I had this bad feeling." Like, yeah, listen to that.
Yeah. Or I'm working for NASA and I had this bad feeling that maybe the O-rings weren't going to work on that particular day because it was colder than any other day we've ever had.
Yeah.
Now that is a true story, and people did try to pass that information up, but they didn't accept that information because it wasn't facts. There was no data.
I lived by Morton Thiokol, so I'm familiar with that story.
Oh, yeah. So you know the story. So anybody else that out there, you should check out the research on the Challenger explosion that took place in 86. And really, it's a culture issue. It wasn't a scientific issue. It was a culture issue. It was an intuition issue in many ways. But back to the story that you just gave, that intuitively you knew that maybe your marriage wasn't necessarily the right one. At some point, you had the courage to trust that knowledge.
Yeah.
How did you get there? How did you get the trust?
Yeah. There has to be enough trust to overcome that fear, right? You got this much fear, but you're not going to move until that trust exceeds that fear. As long as the fear is higher, we're stuck where we are. So at some point, we have to do something different, either lower the fear or increase the desire to move out of there. And for me, it was that radio show. It was a radio people saying, "Hey, I died on my deathbed, unwilling to make a change." And I'm like, that is not going to be me. I will not go down that way. I'm not going to let fear rule my life. And in fact, that came up for me. Go ahead, please.
No, your intuitive knowing aligned with some sort of value.
Yes.
Meaning like I knew this was the wrong thing to be in this marriage. And now all of a sudden my value around a life of whatever, prosperity, love, commitment, self-actualization
for my children, what love should look like.
Yeah. All those things, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's really good. So another thing that I took from your story was opportunity, meaning that you had opportunity regarding the voice recordings. You had opportunity when I think you said some sort of a boss or another person left and said, "I demand to have a raise," and you and your colleague was able to run the IT portion of the business, and they said, "Sorry, we've already got the people." So you took the opportunity. I think that's an important thing, to be able to notice opportunities when they're there, because I think sometimes people don't see them because it might cause some change in their life or attitude or behavior or confront some fear. But what's your take on that ability to go from rags to riches relative to opportunities and taking them?
It's 100% to do with making a decision you want to go that way. And then when the opportunities come along, and they always do, in my opinion, it's been my experience with my own life and in others, that when you set your sights on something, I got this dream, I want to head this way, whatever it is, just doors seem to line up, whether it's something woo-woo or whether it's our science, it's our reticular activating system or we're programming our brain, whatever it is. Absolutely. I believe in every case, when we go after a dream, those opportunities show up. They typically show up in levels of fear, though, right? Outside of our comfort zone. We're like, "Oh, there's the dog barking."
Hey, it's okay. I don't hear the dog.
Okay, good. So
we're good.
Good. Excellent. Those, I lost my train of thought. Hang on.
You're talking about opportunities.
Yeah. So I always believe opportunities come up, and it's our willingness to step forward, step up, often step past our comfort zone that determines our success in that path. Because the opportunities are going to present themselves, right? They're going to show up. You're going to get opportunities. If you want to lead, opportunities to lead will show up. If you want to do voiceover work or public speaking, those opportunities are going to come up. But what do you do when those opportunities come on? Do you go, that's too scary, never mind, run away? Or do you step up and take the action? Because I have found that stepping up, taking the action is the path, right?
Absolutely. And I think going in from a sequence perspective, if you have some vision of where you want to go and what you want to experience, and you place that firmly in your viewfinder of life, right? That's what you're committed to. Then you'll start seeing opportunities that align to that. You'll see opportunities that don't align to that. Like, for example, my kid, Taylor, he's almost 23, coming up next week, I guess it is. He has a passion for cars. And we can be driving down a freeway going 70 miles an hour. And then, of course, cars going the other direction are driving 70 miles an hour. So we have about 140 miles worth of speed coming at us, right? He can point out a car in a blink of an eye and know exactly what it is, the make and model, and how many cylinders and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going like, how the heck can you possibly pick on that? Because he has a focus. He has a passion for cars. And so he sees cars. He sees opportunity to see cars. And I think it's the same way in our own life. So you made an interesting thing about the action piece. And I went off to grab a book because I wanted to kind of bring another piece of this conversation to it. Is that there is something to be said for the decision to do something. You're going to take action on something, right?
Yeah.
But the decision doesn't guarantee the result. We judge people on the result, but we don't necessarily judge them on the quality of the decision, right?
Right.
And so you could say, well, I drank too much. I'm kind of drunk and I'm going to drive home anyway. The result was, hey, I made it home safe. Cool. I'm okay with it. But my decision was probably not a good one. And so now we start orienting our life around the result versus the decision. So maybe we drive again drunk thinking that the same thing is going to happen. Of course, there's another aspect of all this called luck. There's certain things that are out of our control. So you obviously just took some actions on things and you can't guarantee the result. A little bit of luck thrown into play. And all of a sudden you got some stuff. By the way, I'm referencing a book called Thinking in Bets. I've only about 100 pages into it, so I can't speak to it, but it's about a gal named Annie Duke. And she was like a world-renowned poker player. And she's used the analogy of playing poker in all the split decisions one has to make with high stakes, like sometimes millions of dollars on the line, and studying the relationship between the decision and the result and how luck plays a part of it and how different decision-making process can take place. That I haven't gotten into. But anyway, I thought I would just throw that into our discussion.
I like it. And it's totally true. But even the decisions that don't end up well, I'm not talking about the ones where you drive home drunk, but there are lessons to be had from even those where it did not work out, right? So right. Yeah, I made a decision, it didn't work out. There's a lesson from that one. Rather than, okay, it was successful, even the ones that are failure are lessons. I experienced this, we were in small groups and we've been asked to look at a topic and its opposite. And I brought up, let's talk about success and its opposite, failure. Mm-hmm. And the exercise was, look at it from like, I'm only for that, and then for the opposite, and then for both. So when you looked at success, like I'm only for success, like, yeah, that makes sense. A lot of us are that way. We're very driven. There's a flip side. There's a downside to that, which could be you're taking away time from your family, right? What else are you sacrificing for that success? And you're not really learning a whole lot in the failure part. Failure is where we learn things. So then we switched. We said, all right, let's look at failure. And when we looked at failure, it's like, oh, wow, that's where all the learning is. Like every bit of learning occurs when we fail, not when we succeed. When we succeed, we go, great, on to the next thing. What's next?
Right.
When we fail, we stop and go, what do we do wrong? What do we need to do differently?
Yeah.
Right. And suddenly we started to see that failure is where all the value is, man.
Yeah. Well, it's true. And I will add a caveat to what you said. I totally agree with that. I think organizations don't learn because we don't know how to unpack failure and use it as a springboard into future success. I totally get that. We avoid all sorts of failures and then wonder why we keep repeating the same issue over and over again. On the flip side, though, I also noticed that people sometimes create a result that they would say is a success by all means and measures of describing it. But when asked to reproduce it, they don't know how they did it. Like, you take somebody through a simulation and they go, hey, we made this game work. Well, how did you do it? And it's fascinating. We've got a game called the 7 Chairs game, which is basically kind of like how you move people around in this configuration. And there is no trick to it. It's just like, how do you get people to be in this end result? And even people that have done it well one time, we go, okay, repeat it. They don't even know how they did it. So there's something to be said for, yes, the failure as a great, backyard full of wonderful plants to harvest of learnings. At the same time, I think like, play upon your successes. What is making you successful? And let's keep doing more of that. Let's double down on that. If you're thinking about your leadership brand, you're thinking about your team's effectiveness, let's keep getting better, and refining it even more and more and more to make it so it's almost turnkey. And we shrink down thinking Six Sigma to reduce the failure rates to its very smallest amount. So we now have it down so well, we always can produce that result because we've figured out what success looks like and we can reproduce it. Anyway.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree with that. Like Strength Finder, right? Like, let's find our strengths and find somebody else to cover the stuff that we're not so great at.
Exactly. Right. So I know you're a reader of books around leadership. What's one of your favorite all-time leadership books and why? What is it that you learned from it? Why did it strike you so?
Probably the latest one would be Brené Brown's work. I love everything she writes. Dare to Lead, I think, is probably my favorite book. And it's all about be willing to have those difficult conversations with people. I don't remember what number she cited, but it was like over 80% of companies that she ran into, she was doing consulting work with, where she found that they were not willing to have those difficult conversations with people.
Yeah, right.
And that's absolutely something I believe in. I didn't early on in my career. I was afraid to have tough conversations with people, and it's amazing how badly you can do as a leader when you don't talk to people, right?
Yeah.
So, but it is absolutely a skill that I teach to all new leaders because it's so critical that we be willing to have those tough conversations. If you're avoiding tough conversations, you are leaving success on the table.
It's a great way of putting it. It goes right back to your story around avoiding. You can avoid the reality of your life. The peanut butter jar that's left to eat, or you can avoid the tough conversation with the colleague, a family member, what have you. And then obviously you can learn a lot from that. Trust is built, I think, from those conversations that they're managed well.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That is where the trust happens, in my opinion, when you're willing to have those tough conversations, people see that. It's a little personal, but we had one here where it was during COVID, and my son and his wife were living with us in our basement. I living with my wife and I here, and they were leaving the house. She and I were working from home. So we didn't have any outside, connection. And yet they were going out in the world and coming back every time. So then we had this weird dynamic going on. Well, what if they get it and we don't? My wife's asthmatic. And back then we didn't know what it would do to someone with asthma. Uh-oh. And so it created this tension inside the house. And it was palpable. You could feel it. I walked in the room one day and I could just feel this tension. And I said, that's it. I'm not letting this go on any longer. And so I addressed it. I said, and I was very clear. I said, I feel a tension in the room. And I think that's all you have to do to start. It's just, acknowledge what the tension is, the elephant in the room. All of us were experiencing it, but no one's willing to say anything about it. And that's how you really get that conversation going.
What happened after that? What did you acknowledge that there was tension in the room? What was your next approach?
Yeah. So my next approach was to take ownership of it. So it was, here's how I'm creating it. And I know I am, because you are leaving the house and coming back with people, interacting with people out in the world and coming back potentially having this disease, which could, I thought at the time, potentially kill my wife, the person I love most in this world. So I started with ownership, saying, I know part of this is me. I'm afraid that you go out. So I really believe it starts with ownership on your own part. How did I create this? And when you do that, you open up the floor for other people to say, yeah, I also created it, and here's how I created it. Now we can start to work through it.
I think that's really good advice. There's another thing that comes to my mind about those kind of conversations is that ownership piece for sure, and the vulnerability that comes with it. And also taking ownership of your interpretation of another person's behavior. We seem to judge people's behavior We don't judge their intention. However, we judge our intentions. We don't necessarily judge our behavior. So we have this, it's cattywampus in some ways. And so taking ownership of the interpretation we have of another person's behavior, and then probably after that, confirming around that, and then following up with, this is what I want. What's the request out of all that? Every complaint, I think, is sort of an unspoken request. So what's my request? I would like this, that, or the other thing, and then negotiate, for hopefully a win-win. Did it work out that way? How was your...
It did. Actually,
interpersonal COVID family story, how did it result?
It worked out really well. We addressed the tension in the room. We agreed to try to change some things. So we put a hand sanitizing station in the garage. And then when they came in the house, they would cycle through the garage, at least their hands were clean as they came in. And then we also had ownership in that we were being afraid of this because we didn't know it. We didn't know what it did or how it impacted people. We had a fear, and my wife and I finally said, we're kind of tired of living in fear. That was too. So we had some ownership in our own interpersonal stuff going on. So it was a combination of changing how we felt internally, addressing it openly, and then finding some ways to have compromise in it.
Obviously, this is not something that is just appropriate at home. We could take these same skills that you're describing and use them at our professional relationships as well. Their conflict resolution or avoidance happens all over the place, So I think I just want to make that point. And I think that we as a society got smacked in the face with COVID. And then we got smacked in the face with the fear of having difficult conversations, much like what you were just describing. Because we got this virus that happened, and then in its wake, it created another virus of fear, right? And all of our inability or ability to be able to manage and work through it in a productive way. But however, great opportunities to create relationships and bonding can take place. But on the other hand, if it doesn't, back to your point earlier about avoiding, it can also, calcify the separation we have with one another.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something Brene hits on. It's something I believe in, is that be willing to have those tough conversations. She said, it's not for you, right? So much of the reason I think we hesitate is that we are afraid of what people are going to think of us. What will they say about me afterward? How are they going to think about me? Yeah. This is if you can let that go, take your ego out of it, make it about them, what's best for them, all of a sudden you don't play a factor anymore. And those conversations you see the importance of those conversations. Yeah. Because it isn't about you at all. It's about them.
Well, James, I really appreciate your journey and you sharing it. I think that the integrity that I get from you is that you have brought your own series of lessons into helping others, that you are a man who wants to walk his talk and wants the alignment of your actions to reflect not only what you believe in for yourself, but what you believe in for other people. And I applaud you for that. That's great.
Thank you, Dean. That's very, I appreciate it. You and I are very similar. I can tell by the way you're talking that we have a lot of similar beliefs and ways we go about things. So thank you for that.
So how can people connect with you?
Yeah, you can. So Executech runs the company I work for runs a site set up for podcasts. So it's executech.com/cast, CAST. Or you can reach me at James F at executech.com.
And you're on the social media, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, James M. Fair on Facebook, James M. Fair on LinkedIn. I'm also on those sites as well.
So James M. as in Mary?
Yep. Or Matthew. Yes.
Or Matthew. Their middle name is Mary, really?
That's a Mary. I know. It's hard to believe.
That's interesting.
Yes. M as in Mary. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I will look that up and we will definitely connect and keep this conversation going over maybe a LinkedIn chat.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much
for your time. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Take care.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.